Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning.
Hello.
We're back to an official real live, in person. All errors and edits have to be taken as is.
Yeah, this show's edited.
True statement.
Ask us a question. Ask us a question. If we're live, we're actually live.
Fire away. Come on.
We are live.
Maybe we lost everyone that goes live.
Greg Baldini was saying, I think you have to say like a special word. Last time it was kumquat. So kumquat is the special word, Greg. You have to send us a new secret word so we can say that we are officially live. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Lots have happened in the last couple of days. These weeks, I guess, since we've been talking.
It's been a minute. 2 weeks.
Yeah,
right?
It feels like it's been forever, a little bit too long.
I know.
Did you guys go anywhere for spring break things? For your family?
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah. Oh, you want me to embellish? Sure, yeah.
You don't have to.
I'll
go. Good job. All right.
Yeah.
Good story.
Let's talk about
I found $100 in my pocket.
Yeah. Second year heading down into the Tampa region in Florida.
Oh,
nice.
And it was there's this red tide thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
I've heard. I know about it.
In the ocean. It cleared out the week before.
Nice. No coughing breath. So for those who don't know what red tide, it's like this, I don't know, bacteria, algae.
No, it's an algae. Yeah, I think that ends up suffocating fish along the shorelines. So it creates a bunch of dead fish.
Yep. Yuck.
Roll up on the beaches, and then apparently it can irritate
the lung stuff.
Yeah. People, so you have problems breathing and all this.
Yeah, it's not fun.
We were reading for months before going. It's just like, oh man, what's that going to do to the vacation? Nope. Cleared out.
Good.
Kids had a great time.
Anytime you go to the beach where the kids can just run around and play and have fun.
Yeah.
It was wonderful. We also did a beach thing. We went down to Florida as well.
Oh, wow.
And we thought we sunscreened them day one. I mean, day one is usually the worst day. So we apparently we ran them all out into the ocean, and them running out into the ocean and the sunscreen just poof gone. It was it evaporated. So everyone's crispified. Everyone's like, my top of my ears hurt, my neck hurts, everything's. It was bad burn. And I don't know, maybe the sun was more intense. We're not used to going down around this time of the year. We usually go much later in the year, so maybe it's just not as intense at that point. But anyways, it was crazy. A lot of fun and super enjoyed. I love putting my feet in nice soft sand. That's awesome. Tommy, where'd you go?
Indeed.
Dude, I stayed here.
Tommy went to a Yankees game.
I watched a lot of Yankee games. So, Florida, red tide and sunburn. I think if you're coming from Milwaukee, you don't do sunburn. Sunburn can't compete with Florida sun.
Oh, yeah, there's no sun up here. You could lay outside for weeks and not get sunburn up in Wisconsin compared to Florida.
What was the weather? I heard it was 88.
Yeah, it was 80s all week. Nice.
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
Tommy thinks it's too hot.
Yeah.
Too much sweating.
I'm not a fan of sand.
You were a Floridian, right, for a while?
I was, and I don't like the beach. I think it's completely overrated.
Are you a mountains kind of guy?
Mountains, not the beach. I'll do the mountains.
Okay, so anything else not beach?
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever found someone who doesn't like the beach.
Well, you do a podcast with them, so
true. Well, there we go. You learn something new every day.
So were you able to update things? Obviously, you're on vacation. Were you working? Did you see that there's a March update? Did you see all the amazing new things that Microsoft keeps literally churning out?
Oh, totally. Yes. Definitely was taking a peek at the March update. I've been trying to. So I was partly working. I'll say that. So I was not fully. I mean, the kids have off school, and I don't have off work. Work still happens. People still got to get stuff done. So I was still. Working on things.
The joys of owning your own company,
right? Yeah, well, it comes with the double-edged sword. Yeah. You don't get to actually officially ever walk away from stuff. You got to keep people busy. So you're not relying on just yourself to feed. You got to feed other people too.
Man, so that is one of the things I enjoy working for an organization, because I built a team, and these guys are rock stars, right? So I just tee it up, and literally I left on a Friday, and Thursday I was like, okay, guys, let's walk through this again. And if you need anything, here's here. And I basically got the shut up. We've got it. And I was like, I would
Beautiful.
check out for a good long portion of the vacation. That to be able to do that is so refreshing because it's just like you don't realize. My wife was saying this too. Is like you don't realize how high the stress levels get, or how like you just accumulate this burden, right? That all of a sudden just can be released as you go on vacation and just like reset a little bit. And it's nice because you can come back and, for me anyway, you see things differently. You know, you can look at the business in different ways and figure out different strategies that you may not have seen before. And yeah, good stuff. I had a great vacation.
Excellent. Very good. Moving on to some other things, that we had some community articles kind of come up that were pretty interesting. Tom, you want to pick up the one that you kind of picked up here that was pretty interesting?
Yeah, so this is actually our very own James Bartlett on basically, I think it's a new community thing, so we'll send the link, but it's called the Data Dojo, and it looks to be just another great community center for people. I think it's going to be have contributions in terms of putting workshops together. I am all about stuff like this, and I think that user groups should do hackathons again. I think those are so underrated, working with people and trying to figure out those types of problems. I know it's not as easy with something like Power BI because only one person can be in it, but at the same time, I am all for things where there's workshops, where there's the contributions, like with the WOWs, Workout Wednesdays, but especially when people are working together. So looks like a cool thing. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, I liked it from the standpoint. So this is James's journey, right? That's just started with him creating a community of practice, right, within his college or organization. And
well, let's be clear, he's not in college. He works for a
no,
college.
correct, right? The faculty, right?
The faculty, yes.
Those that he's working with.
Anyone who's working with data things, which is really cool. He's going through his experience.
Yeah. So these, like, this is, I think, the first and then in a series. What I love about these series type things where a lot of what you read in even articles we write come from an area of like, we've solved this problem, here's how it's done. With the people problem, right, which is Power BI adoption and a lot of roadmap stuff and things that we've talked about, when you introduce people and environments, things change, right? So the fact that he's taking people along for this journey, it's not like, hey, we figured it all out and here's how we did it. He's just it's the early preview, right? Like as they're going along, he's describing what they're attempting to do, how it's working out, and teasing into the next one already. So I love it. Looking forward to how it goes for them, and also being part of their learning process and being able to adapt for our use cases. So good stuff.
Yeah, I really liked it, and I think his community pieces here, kind of the couple, let's call it rules of the road. He's at an interesting term for his community. He's calling it the Data Dojo, which I think is kind of fun. Kind of a neat little play on words there as well. And then it's, because some of the values here are just very fun about community. And I love how you're pushing this, right? Anyone interested in learning, you're a member, right? Come on in. If everyone's welcome. Attend as many or as few as you like. Again, the idea here is, I think, if you're adding value, people will show up. So if you just regularly add value and people enjoy working around with you, makes total sense. A couple other points here towards the end. There are no instructors and there are no students. We're all here to learn. I think it's a great value. I think that's really kind of a good way of approaching it. And then everyone says, "Oh, this is a stupid question." Every time someone says that in a meeting, I'm like, "I have a stupid question." Like, there's no stupid questions. Everyone was there at some point. Everyone doesn't know something. Let's help you clarify. Let's get your mental model right. But there's the only stupid question in the Data Dojo is the one that goes unstated, which I think is also really good. Or unasked. Yeah, unasked. I like that. I think that's a really good way of approaching the situation. So, James, great article, really good. I put the article in the link here in the chat. So if you want to go read more about what is happening at the Des Moines, Iowa user group and how they're doing community, go check it out. It's a really good read, and I think there's going to be more coming. I think this is like part one of a couple parts that James been kind of formulating in his mind on how to build more of a community practice. And actually, James, I got to give mad credit. James has been a pivotal person on helping out with the business ops tool that we develop, and hopefully we're cleaning up the tool again, adding some more stuff, and there's going to be another release here coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So working towards another awesome release on that. Moving on ahead, let's talk about maybe our main article for today. Oh, speaking of which, I'm actually doing an install right now. I think the next month's of desktop just released or something.
April 6th. It's probably one of those minor updates.
Or you think?
Oh, it's got to be.
I was on desktop this yesterday afternoon, and I was just playing with some data, getting some examples going, and I just had a little screen pop up that was saying, "Hey, update the window in the bottom. Update your desktop." I'm like, really? Am I that far behind? Maybe I'm still on February. I don't know. I'm updating now. I'm not sure how far behind I am, so I've got to go check it out and see what happens with this new install.
Yeah, there's a minor update on 4.4, but I don't think it's like the April release.
Gotcha. Okay, so they didn't get it out early for some reason.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll check it and I'll let you know. That being said, sorry, one more thing I have you guys played around with the new data gateway experience? It's newer.
It's been around like that for about almost a year.
With the new permissions and the new, it's like
The new
unified
data
between
sources?
both Power Apps and now Power BI. Okay.
No.
So we just did
It's been a hot minute since I've installed a new gateway.
Well,
It's always been part of the gateway.
This is the challenge. Well, the gateway's always been there, but I think now Microsoft is unifying a bit more of the experience around how it looks. So if you go to the data gateway in PowerBI.com, it looks different than it used to. There's a bit of a UI change, and now that UI matches what's already in Power Apps. So maybe they started with Power Apps.
Oh, you're talking about the managing gateways in the service?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And out of curiosity,
for almost a year.
Out of curiosity, does your managing gateways say, when you go to managing gateways, what does it say in PowerBI.com service for you? Does it say manage gateways, or does it say manage connections and gateways?
Manage connections and gateways, and then the data preview.
Okay, because I had someone in our class say they didn't have managing connections and gateways, so it indicated to me that something was changing and they were doing something different there.
Well, there is a tenant setting actually that says allow Microsoft to basically experiment and do A/B tests.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's maybe what I'm partially seeing there, because I have the when you go to the manage connections and gateways, I have now a new window that's called data preview, which is interesting because I think that's new.
I think that's been around for almost a year. This is what I've been working with.
I feel like
nothing's
different.
changed.
Maybe they've been just some tweaks to it.
Next time that's a pre-show thing.
I am telling you. So.
Hey, maybe I should do more gateways.
How often does it happen all the time, right? Like how often? Yeah, you cycle around different parts of the product. And it's like, hey, it's new to you.
You're like, wait a minute, something looks
What's
different here.
that doing here? It's like, yeah.
I just noticed one of the articles that I hadn't seen before on the blog. Pin workspaces, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, it's a simple feature, but I love it.
I'm very happy for that one.
Scroll through to all those workspaces, and now I can just like
100%.
I know.
Give me my top ones. That's a quality of life improvement there.
They've been making some design changes too to the service, like these like slow little updates. So,
all right. So I just finished my install. Yeah, it is March 2023, but it is a newer, minor version of March 23. So they must have been fixing some bugs in there or something. I got excited all of a second.
Tommy, right again.
Right again. You know what I'm thinking is the podcast. Tommy's right.
This is becoming a consistent theme here. Tommy is right again.
I'm just here for the ride.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Excellent. All right, let's move on to our main topic for today. So when I was at SQL Bits, just so happened my schedule kind of rolled out where I was up early, just kind of how my mind was working. I was just kind of busy doing things. Again, always working because I have a business, and that's kind of how it, like you were saying, Seth, like you're never really off. You don't really take a break. So I was always kind of doing stuff in the morning. But while I was there, Kurt Bueller was actually at the guy who runs Data Goblins was always there at the conference. So it just so happened our schedules seemed to work out where we were both up early and usually eating breakfast together. So a lot of videos or a lot of talking early in the morning. So with that, we're jumping into his article today, which is called "It Depends." Power BI best practices and operations. So let's kick it off here. Tommy, what do you think? What do you hens a lot when we talk about things? We'll take this one today.
Well, first off, the term "it depends" goes on our official podcast T-shirt, right next to Game Changer. So
Game Changer,
and we've used it all. Yeah, we've used it all the time. But I love this article, and honestly, I could really see this being it's going to be very hard to even break this down in an hour. But really, so what Kurt really broke down was, we know what best practices are. We've talked about best practices and, no calculated columns and have a star schema and, like the process that you do both from as the developer, but also what you would do in the organization from adoption. Here's your best practices. And really, Kurt kind of, I don't want to say throws a wrench in it, but he's like, okay, yes, there's best practices, but we're dealing with a lot of different situations where there's also something that's optimization techniques, where we need to find the solution here, where it's maybe putting a filter on a card rather than putting the DAX, into it, which serves the same purpose, or just doing, in a sense, the things that you've learned over the experience that can clean something or fix something or solve something, but it wouldn't be considered best practice. And there's a large distinction between the two. And I think the other point that I think is the hot, I don't want to say the hot take, but the where I see the wrench here is, listen, just because something's best practice doesn't mean that it always must be followed. And I think especially in our world, it's not always the same input. It is completely different when it comes to our models and the situations. So we have to be willing to adapt. So that's my take from it. I am very interested in what you guys first got out of it.
Overall,
I think this is a lot of times.
I on a really high level, I love this article because one of my biggest pet peeves, or you call them like Seth things where he flies off the handle or something, is where people overuse the term best practices, right? Like everything's a best practice, everything. So I stopped using it, like, because it was just, not everything is a best practice. Just because something works, it doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere. But I didn't wrap my head around like separating out, okay, what is a best practice versus something else. And what Kurt's bringing forward is like, it's an optimization, right? It's unique to a specific use case, or there are methods that you can go about and figure out optimizations that are going to be different, whereas best practices typically apply to almost everything, right? There's a general rule of when you do these things, there's a benefit to doing them, and that's why we do them across the board, versus something that is objectively valuable to perform on a report, but it's only specific to your use case. And for me, just reading through that and having like following along with his thought process in breaking it out logically was worth the read in and of itself, because I'm like, you know what, this makes a ton of sense, and now I can not have this meaningless aversion to best practices. I now have this thought around making the distinction between what is actually a best practice versus an optimization. And Kurt brought me along for the ride. So great article, and that's like on a high level what I really enjoyed about it.
So I really like, so I think to your point there, Seth, I think I really like your idea of best practices are overused, because there could be a ton of these things and they may work in certain scenarios. But if you talk to Greg Baldini, there will be patterns that are best practices that don't work well in all scenarios. And there are other patterns that work better on larger data sets versus smaller ones. And you'll find that there are different patterns across different solutions. So I don't think I would ever abandon fully the term best practices. But I would say there's a level of understanding that needs to occur when you're working with data modeling, particularly when you understand what the model is trying to calculate. You can you can kind of see and anticipate what the engine will do, and it's like an understanding level, right? So I think best practices are what I would quantify as you now are starting to understand how the model works and how it works efficiently, right? So again, Kurt goes through some things here, like using bidirectional relationships is not a really, we don't want to use that one. It's an anti-pattern. We want to have a single direction that dimensions filter facts, those kind of things. And I would also kind of echo here, especially when you're talking about best practices, star schema, I think, is one of these items where it's in an ideal state, it works really well. But a lot of your models don't always adhere to a full, very clean star model design. It's difficult to get everything into a star model. So I think there are areas where you can bend the rules a little bit. And I think that's where I like where Kurt kind of takes it for the optimization techniques, because now you're looking at, okay, what in your scenario, I'm trying to optimize what this model is doing. And so it's a bit more of a narrowly focused problem and solution. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's two areas here when we say best practices, maybe. And Seth, I'm with you in terms of I'm using best practices less and kind of using more principles or that terminology. But there's kind of two areas here in terms of the developer role of best practices and optimization, and also from the BI adoption role, the BI admin role, the center of governance that Kurt goes into, where in both situations there's a Microsoft roadmap, on documentation. Mike, you run the world's best governance program and possibly the only one. But like you have an incredible course that's all around best practices and really like learning the knowledge, which is so needed. But and obviously you can get certification in Power BI, or you can read all the books. All those are about best practices. But when we're in this situation and we're dealing with either the variables of the people or the variables of the model and this situation we need to solve, usually it's never going to fit, or the majority of best practices don't necessarily always fit that box, from soup to nuts, so to speak. Maybe there's like a base you can start with, but I think what I've seen as success is being flexible and adapting.
So I like when later on in the article where Kurt talks about some possible examples of optimizations, right? And these are some patterns that you find or things that work to make things optimized, right? If you're going to use a distinct count or distincts on top of columns, sometimes that's slower than just using a SUMX instead, right? And there's also other things. I think Greg Baldini has done some DAX hacks as well. Like if you use a divide function versus some other functions, I can't remember what the calculation was. Greg, you'd have to correct me if I'm wrong here if he's online. But if you use some other functions, it actually is faster to iterate through the math than it is to do a distinct or unique count across the various elements in the model. Another example here is using if eager instead of just if, or disabling cross-filtering in visual interactions, right? So turning some of these things off optimizes what the report's doing so that it makes it a bit easier to work with, and you can actually speed up the performance of the report. You're optimizing a bit more. Those may not be best practices, though. These may be more of like a little bit of a hack to get it to work correctly. And this is, maybe to some degree, when we were making entire navigation panes on the side of our report, and we were using that was a bit of a hack, right? That was an optimization to get a navigation element into the report. There was no way to do that, but you had to make all these bookmarks, all these other additional elements, which were slowing down the report to get the functionality that we wanted, right? So that was maybe an optimization for user UX UI, but it's not really a best practice, right? Now we have tools like that I think by people building those kind of things, that has forced the hand of Microsoft. And now Microsoft says, hey, this is actually something we can solve. By the way, here's a bookmark navigator. Here's a page navigator. So now you have these navigation elements by default.
I was literally just dealing yesterday with a project, and it's a template from a data provider. And they're like, could you add a button to the page, like another button, because I'm trying to add this page. I'm like, well, we kind of can't. They're like, why? I'm like, because those buttons are actually an image. So,
Yeah.
and so there's all these, again, you call them hacks, but I think there's underlying principles that obviously should be applied, but there's so much that whether it's just the need or the necessity that we have to adjust to.
I mean, let's be real. These aren't hacks. These are creative solutions to problems that like we have to solve that the tool doesn't support, right?
Exactly.
I like to think about those in that regard. I like what Kurt does in terms of like defining best practices, what those are at the beginning of the article, defining what an optimization is. What he says is best practices are methods to address a problem recognized as superior to alternative approaches, right? And the way I read this, and he's got a whole chart of different areas of examples of the two different flavors of best practices that he defines, and I like this as well, which is the do, and then or the pattern, and then the don't, like the anti-pattern of things, like things we don't want to be doing. What's interesting to me and makes a lot of sense is the best practices patterns that he is either saying are good patterns or anti-patterns are on a higher level, which I would expect them to be, because if we're going to make generalities and say these are some really good things you should almost always do, right? Or all of your reports should follow these processes, those are have to be on a higher level, at least from my perspective, because when we start getting into specific optimizations, right, or specific things, that's where it falls into this optimization, right? And that's where maybe some of my knee-jerk reaction has always happened previously, because a lot of the times we fall really quickly out of best practice patterns, right, into very specific use cases or patterns that only work within the context of my model or the reports that are connected to the same model. And in that case, I think he even opens this door, which is applicable, which is sometimes these optimizations are actually against a normal best practice, right? So there's this nuance between defining what we would say is a best practice and just some of his examples. Keep it simple. So 3 bullets in there: use straightforward, clear, and concise models and code. Simpler solutions are easier to maintain and understand. Occam's razor: seek solutions with the least number of elements, right?
Yeah, I like that.
High level, but at the same time, like these are great framework sort of things that you would want to, or I should say, you should spend time ensuring you're walking through, or have this list of to-dos when building reports or models. And if you're going to deviate, make sure it's a specific deviation, right? Like or I should say, an intentional deviation away from a best practice or something that we would typically say you should do everywhere, but it may not work in this case because maybe there's some requirement that forces us to get, what did I just say? Forces us to find creative solutions, right?
And that's a really good point, because I think there's a difference between hack and optimization. I think hack is you're kind of incurring a bit of tech debt because it might not be completely tested in more than one situation. Honestly, I think optimization, anything that you do from the optimization point of view, it still has to at least follow principles of it's got to be scalable, it's got to be reliable, and it's got to be optimal. And I think that's the difference with a hack, where it's maybe this one use case and you're just trying to figure something out and getting back to it. But optimizing something where it may not actually fall into any documentation is still something that you can trust to run, that if it can be flexible with a model changing and you can rely on it. And I think that's the difference between hack and optimization.
I go back, and Kurt had some other really interesting points here. I think along those lines that you guys are both talking about here, he talks about a section here about challenges for learning and teaching. And I thought this was a really insightful piece. Rules are easier to memorize than concepts. Concepts are harder to dissect and understand, is kind of the paraphrase that I'm reading there. And I thought that was really interesting. Nuance is frustrating when there's nuances to things. And I think that makes sense. That's why there's a lot of answers like, hey, it depends. It kind of is, if you do it this way, you would want to design it in this format. If you want to do it that way, you design it in that format. And so I think that the idea here is, understanding conceptually what's occurring makes more sense, because then you can handle more of the nuances as you're designing measures or pages or whatever, right? So, conceptually, right, we want to use Gestalt principles, right? Conceptually, we want to have less things on the page, because too many visuals make it too small, or people will get overwhelmed, right? Conceptually, we have a direction on what we're going to do for design, but when we step back, yeah, okay, we put an extra couple of visuals in here, fine, right? But generally, we know what the concept is, so that gives you a little bit more flexible. Like, every report doesn't have to have 3 visuals on a page, right?
Right.
Like, you have the ability, you understand the concept, and then you're able to pair that with what you need to get accomplished. So then again, it does provide that little bit of extra flexibility. I thought that was really good. I thought that was a really neat point.
I agree with you. Where my mind was going in several different directions, because business intelligence and like report building and the things that we do is anything but paint by numbers, right? Right. And for folks that come in with very specific questions all the time, expecting that it's going to be this repeatable thing that they can just like copy and paste into different areas, it's not the case, right? And especially with understanding what the model looks like, how did you set things up, do you have an appropriate star schema, all of those are the consistent questions that are asked on the community. Like I go back when I was heavily involved in answering questions in the Power BI community, I literally had the same set of questions every single time, because it set the base context for me to understand like where the question was coming from. But without those, I would be lost. I wouldn't know, right? And I think where my thought here in the nuance is frustrating part would be was around like certifications, right? And at first I was going to be like, this is why certifications are bad. But at the same time, maybe this is why certifications are good. Because if I think about my own experience related to, SQL, Power BI was slightly different because I was so ingrained in the material. Taking the certification was like, okay, no, not a problem.
It's a checkbox. It's like, okay,
however,
we did it.
Right. But however, for folks who are using Power BI, but don't know the scope of the program, don't know all these other things, and are just chewing off little bits and pieces at a time, a certification, or like the process to go achieve one, I think gives a goal for somebody to start consuming more information that gives them the context where they start to understand the nuance. You know what I'm saying? So, because it's different. I'm always a proponent of it's different to go just solve the singular problem that you're trying to solve to build a visual, and then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one, and you don't understand the context of what you're trying to create with the DAX measures or the model itself, etc. Whereas learning in a different way along with the specifics is always a good thing to do, right? And I'm a big picture thinker, so I have to get that big picture first, right? Just so I know where I'm landing in the ecosystem, and then I go drill in typically, right? But a lot of the times we can't do that, and that's where I'm saying a lot of this nuance can be frustrating, but you mitigate that with trying to increase your knowledge base around everything that we can be doing, because then it opens these doors for, oh, I'm learning about this DAX calculation and it's solving this problem, but I understand that it's specific to this model, like this person's problem. But at least it's in the back of my head then that I have a new pattern that I saw somebody use, and I can adjust it to my own use case, as opposed to what I see a lot of people doing that are newer, which is I asked this question, it's very similar, and the answer on the community was this, and it doesn't work for me. Why? Right? And that's where this nuance, or it depends, or a lot of the optimization techniques, and I think a lot of the DAX functions and how people are trying to help others solve those equations and functions without that knowledge base is where people get a little frustrated. So love like that.
Well,
the funny thing is we've been talking about like a paragraph in this very long article for like 8 minutes here. But yeah, I love Kurt's stuff.
Well, Seth, the document starts with literally the words critical thinking. And I think everything you just said revolves around that, where what what separates, I think, a skillful developer in Power BI with someone who's maybe relatively new is you and I may come to the same number in a visual, in a card, but I can trust mine that can be adaptable and flexible to that model. And I know that I can entrust it for probably not to break based on things changing. And also if you do certain filters, that I can let it run and it can be reproduced. I can also explain why that number is doing what that number it is. And I love your point about going through the community, but all we're doing is just adding to our tool belt. It's like, okay, there's that technique. Okay, how does that work? Where can that work? Where does it not work? And I think that is part of, again, that what distinguishes, really separates, I think, expertise in this space.
Well, knowledge base, sure, yeah.
Well, I think it's the critical thinking with concepts. I mean, maybe that's everything, but
I'm going to change direction here just a little bit. I'm thoroughly impressed with his section around performance best practices. This just blows my mind. Like the thought he puts into these sections is just so good. So I'm really enjoying. If you scroll down to the section on the article where it starts talking about performance best practices, and it starts talking with like the process, right? So again, that's what you were talking about earlier, right? Going through these testing and optimizations and how the best practices work. I think a lot of times when we try to get into these reports, we lose this idea of we'd never really define what was the problem. What was the thing I'm trying to solve for? Particularly when it's like DAX problems or something like that. And a lot of times, Seth, you and I have talked about this a lot extensively. And I think we've talked about this in the podcast as well. When you get to a point where you don't know what the DAX is doing, it helps to go away and find a solution or, remove yourself from the actual model because there may be bad data, there may be other weird things. Go find a way where you can test repeatedly different solutions. And I think that's what Kurt here is kind of refining, define the problem in its context, research and understand all your available options, build a solution, test it multiple times. And he refers to a DAX Studio where you can write DAX statements and test it 3, 4, 5 times, run it multiple times, and you get more of a regular distribution of what that test looks like. Change the approach, test it again. Now, I love this idea, but the challenge here for me is I don't have enough time, I feel like, all the time to go into the nth degree for all these testing things. But what impressed me the most is when Kurt goes down here to the bottom part of that article, he starts talking about query performance result of test number 1. He's got a little simple bar chart. Great. Then he goes in query performance test of all 20 tests and does a rain plot distribution with bars on there for, I thought, wow, this is really good. And he spent the time to go grab the rain cloud plot from Deneb, from Carrie Kolosko, sorry, I said that wrong, and adapt her visual for the article. And then again, he does another one where he has a violin plot showing the same thing on, performance analyzer on the page render time. Like the visuals he's putting, the effort he's putting into this is really awesome, because I really am enjoying the visuals and the attention to detail on, okay, I have a whole bunch of tests and I need to think about how do I distribute or display that information in a graphical way so I can actually see the distribution of what the content's doing. He's doing another one, query performance with changing relationship data key points, right? Or a date versus an integer versus a string. And he's actually doing some performance measures there. And I really appreciated the article and the really nice visuals that he's putting in place here that are helping you visualize and see how he's performance testing the data from his various objects. I thought that's really cool.
I agree. I think it's great. I guess I have a question for you guys. How much time?
All the time.
How much time do you guys invest in testing, or see that organizations want to have you invest a lot of time in testing?
Well, this is a good one. I think this, for me, it's like law of diminishing return, right? If the report's fast, they don't care what you write, right? It's not they're not looking for you to shave off. Like if things return within a half a second, they don't want you to spend time making it down to a quarter of a second, right? Like the gain on that problem isn't an issue. When you go to a page and it takes 15 seconds, 20 seconds to render, that's when people notice like, hey, this page feels a little bit slow. And I think at that point, there's like a threshold, right? There's a threshold on whatever you're rendering on the page where like, hey, you kind of feel it's a little sluggish. At that point in time, then they're willing to spend the money or time to optimize and build that stuff. I think over time, when I observe newer developers of Power BI tend to run into these problems fairly frequently, and they build bad DAX right away. And there's usually a lot more pages that are just slow in nature because, why are you writing the DAX that way? That's very inefficient, right? You're not using an if statement. You're not cutting out the data you don't need. You're over filtering or you're under filtering and doing too much calculations. So I think when I step into organizations where we have people that are less experienced in DAX particularly, it's very easy for me to go through and make a handful of changes that immediately speeds up the report. So in those cases, it makes a lot of sense. I'd also echo, usually when I'm coming into these organizations, the data model is also a mess. We have like 45, 50, 90 tables in a model. There's all kinds, like, again, this was one of these, it just worked. And we kept adding things to it. And here we are a year later where we have this rat's nest of tables and relationships and nothing's designed or planned out. So, we have to come in and say, okay, really, what are we trying to accomplish here? What pages, what value is coming out of this report? And can we simplify that model down? And that's where the real value comes from. So I think to answer your question, it depends.
Mike, hold that thought because I want to get to that.
Sorry.
No. There's something there that I think is very interesting with our conversation today. But Seth, when we're going to say testing, are we just saying process only, like in the sense of the like loading time, or are we talking about accuracy? Are we talking about feature functionality when you say test?
Yeah, it was a broad question,
Okay.
and I think as Mike was describing, providing a good answer, I think I would narrow it down, right? Like narrow it down to the performance testing, right? And I'll stop there and let you comment.
Yeah, honestly, with new models, and it's actually very similar to what Mike said, where it's going in, you go, whoa, and you're just looking at, it's like, okay, where are the problem childs here? What do we need to keep? Like what needs to get removed? And then it's just kind of going through that and called the process. But yeah, it's really usually with models already created. Unless it is something large that I'm dealing with that, you notice it's going slow, and generally you can pick that up, but it's not a part of every process. No.
Yeah.
So
to me, this strikes. So this is very dev focused, right? Like this is part of a dev best practices, thing as we're implementing. What I like about it is, not having a test process in here leaves you wide open to deploying a change that has unintended consequences, right? And I guess my initial question was like, do organizations really spend a ton of time testing across the board, all the scenarios? Some do. I would argue more often than not, like you're not investing tons of time in terms of like performance tweaking and testing, just making sure things operate in such a way that it's not customer impacting, whether those are internal or external, right? But at the same time, from a developer perspective, or whomever is building the report, understanding these changes and how they're impacting, right, are very useful for your team to understand, right? Because if it's, hey, we need to make this modification, or we're having challenges around this particular, DAX function or measure, having like doing a benchmark first and then testing the new change to understand the impact it is, I think, extremely valuable when you can fit that into the cycle. And if you're making a lot of changes, I would argue that for sure testing has to be part of that. And it also makes sense. Like I'm trying to like find this realm where I'm like, sometimes I do it and sometimes I wouldn't. But at the same time, like does this mic make sense where no, I guess it wouldn't because each model is different. Where I'm trying to think of like, is there a standardized way in which you could create some test templates or test things that you would
I've seen people
automatically
try to do
100%
apply
serious.
to every
Yeah.
model?
I think you should definitely do that. I think I would also echo, okay, we talk about this a lot, right? Is something governed or something not governed, right? So in a governed data set, something that's going to be critical, used at the higher levels, or you're like certifying content coming from that body or that report. I think in those cases, you're doing a bit more rigor what you're describing, right? There's a bit more process, there's a bit more rigor around those things. Other things that are maybe team or personally based reporting, I probably wouldn't spend a whole bunch of time noodling on a lot of extra effort there to make sure that those are spot on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so to your point, right? But I think there's a huge miss in the market right now. There's really not a lot of tools today that we could use that enable us to write tests quickly and easily across all these things inside the data model.
Not for tabular model, no.
Not for tabular models.
If we're in data science, we'd be golden.
Yeah. And it also echoes, I think, further upstream. So I find a lot of challenges are the data model is doing a lot of business logic to fix data problems that are coming from the data warehouse somewhere else. So I feel like there's another challenge here that's also occurring that is, the data model gets overly complex because of we don't control the upstream data engineering to some degree. And you need a little bit more upstream data engineering to clean out and fix things, which then simplifies your model, which means less tables, which then simplifies your DAX all the way downstream. So it really, it helps to have that architect level view of upstream, the model, and then what it's doing in the report. And I think Kurt also put out another article more recently around where does the measure need to live? Does the measure need to live in the model, or should we be building more measures in the thin report? When's the right appropriate time to migrate measures that are in the thin report back up into the model? Again, I think there's some really good thoughts and capabilities around this. The technology, I think, is changing our habits on how we think about these things.
Man, you've just literally put two great points. So I wanna say one aspect to that you highlighted or you mentioned about testing that I think is very particular to what we're talking about is you go in and you automatically notice a bad model, too many tables, etc. I think we could all at least agree, and I know we've been saying, best practices are not what we thought they were, but we can all agree there's at least some definite universal best practices, base things that we can do. It doesn't necessarily apply to the entire solution, but call it building your foundation, right? And I think that's really important to know. And what we're and especially what we do, where there's those principles that we should definitely say are best practices, where in terms of how we're loading, what we're loading, the relationships we're creating. But that being said, Mike, and you just said it again, so you're like setting me up. The tool is constantly changing.
Yeah.
The features are constantly changing. So it's almost impossible to implement best practices when the feature completely changes. It doesn't mean it gets deprecated, but there might be a better way.
Yep. Look, again, page navigation, like we talked about earlier, right? We had this practice of how you build page navigation. A tool changes, boom. Now there's a single button that you use that does it automatically for you. Like, great.
The March update had query reduction, so if you are dealing with issues, you can just click the button.
Turn that on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so I think there are underlying best practices, absolutely, the foundations, obviously, but I think we're also not only are we dealing with different data sets with different like logic that we have to deal with, because this, like you said, it's not upstream, but the tool itself is constantly changing whatever principles or processes we're putting in place. So I don't know, what do you guys think in terms of the old best practices? If you were dealing like in a SQL Server database back in the day, things didn't really rapidly change, but how important do you think it is for us to adapt to those changes and also begin to roll those out?
I think by nature we adapt, but
Yeah.
like the only thing from my perspective that a rapidly changing tool like Power BI does for trying to confine best practices is make them more generic, right? And I think if you look at all the do's and don'ts of best practices that Kurt goes through in the article, they're all very high level. And by nature, that's because the tool changes a lot. But if it didn't, maybe you could have more specific best practices. You know what I'm saying? Like where, like even in 5, like one of his filter early and only keep needed data. One of the bullet points: prevent loading excessive data in Power Query transforms. Okay, that's a functional technology problem we have right now. Is that something we're going to have a problem with in a year? I don't know. Right? So those sorts of changes in the tool absolutely do, I think, change the best practices or recommendations, which also creates some of the problems around like, hey, the community's been around for 6-7 years now, and people are still going in and looking things at, in 2020 or, where the tool didn't have to Mike's point, right? We built things differently because the tool didn't have a lot of the features and functionality.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, I would agree with you. Like, yes, we have to be cognizant that not only best practices, but a lot of materials and answers to questions evolve over time. And I think maybe that is one of the challenges for newer users of Power BI is understanding that this tool, when it came out, was on such a rocket path of innovation and rapid changes that once you once you look at like holistically, like 1, 2, 3 years, those first 3 years, thousands of changes, right? And it's kind of slowed down, right? So it's like, hey, if it's within the last year, you're more likely to find the right answer or something. But be cognizant in those forums of when somebody answered the question, because it could, like today, you might walk in there and be like, yeah, but all I have to do is this, right? Yes, now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're probably winding down here just a little bit for the end of this episode. So I think it's about time to run it for ChatGPT. What does ChatGPT say about this topic? So the question I asked it was, what is the difference between a best practice and an optimization? So hopefully that'll cover part of the topic here. And the response is, a best practice refers to an approach or methodology to perform a task or achieving a goal. And I like this definition next. It's a proven technique that's been developed and refined over time to achieve a desired outcome efficiently and effectively. Best practices are generally accepted and as the most appropriate and successful way of doing things based on a past experience. I think that's a really good summary, right? People have tested it, they've figured things out, and now this is kind of like multiple people have noodled on this idea. Here's roughly what we're seeing as communicated as a best practice.
Yep.
On the other hand, an optimization involves improving efficiency or effectiveness of a process, a system, or product. It's the process of making something better, faster, or more efficient, and identifying and eliminating inefficiencies, redundancies, and or bottlenecks. The optimization involves analyzing data, identifying areas of improvement, and implementing changes to achieve the desired outcome. And that's exactly what's in Kurt's article. Like halfway down, he starts doing this. Like here's the process. He literally outlines: define the problem statement, come up with solutions, research solutions, test multiple solutions, define which one performed the best. Like that makes total sense. So this really, I like this part because this really resonates with my engineering mindset. Like I love the idea of like a hypothesis. Here's what I think is true. Do some things, figure out some stuff. Okay, what of the 3 or 4 things you tried, which one's the best way to wrap it up? And then lastly, it says here, in summary, the best practice is a proven approach to achieve a specific goal. Optimization involves finding ways to make best practices even better by making it more efficient or effective. I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. They're kind of interrelated. Any reactions? What would you say? I thought that was a pretty good answer from ChatGPT. I would say that's probably about a 7 or 8.
Solid.
Oh, hey, there you go. We should start rating like
That's
David
right. I
Courtney
need to
and
create that
pizza.
model.
I give this one it's a 7.4. 7.4. Solid
right.
7.4.
I'm creating that model. So we're going to start training that data set. I'm doing that today.
Game changer.
It's solid. I'll get a 6.
6? Only a 6?
It's a little generic, but it's good.
Okay. All right. It is generalizing the entire internet to give you the answer. So, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not giving it a pass. So
would you give it a 6?
I say a 6.
That's a lazy man's rating. Just a solid number.
Okay.
6.2.
I was sending you guys a giant article about why the ranking between 1 to 7 is ultimately and efficiently better than 1 to 10. So I would.
Oh, that sounds like another podcast episode.
I don't know how to do Power BI, but yeah, sure, we'll put another topic. I just have one quick question because I really want to ask. This idea of it depends is so subjective in a sense because it really is based on that particular person saying that. For everyone listening, what would you guys say when your ultimate experience and your knowledge, how do you navigate or how would you know in terms of making the right call? So when you say it depends, you probably have more than one option. So basically, how do you know you actually have the skill to be able to say you're optimizing or not hacking?
So I think the it depends question comes from I didn't get enough input on the question to understand exactly what your answer should be, right? Usually the it depends upon, and then I kind of give you like, okay, it depends upon these additional factors, right? It depends. Are you talking about data that's on-prem or are you talking about data in cloud? Because there's two different solutions from my experience. I think your experience pulls on the right solution with the right context. The it depends statement comes from I didn't understand or I don't have enough input information to accurately give you like what I think is the best solution of all those. At the end of the day, most of my question or most of the stuff that we design is usually boils down to money, right? Time and money, right? You can build the most amazing thing you want, but if you don't have enough time or money, you can't get it done or you're going to spend too much. So most of those decisions, the right solution is the one that takes the least amount of time and costs you the least amount of money to run or build. So I think that's what you try to focus on. And that I think covers if you use those. This is the other scenario we used to hammer on a lot in the podcast was if this report isn't making you money or saving you money, why are you building the report? It's a similar kind of concept. What is the end goal of what you're trying to accomplish? And so I think when I'm saying it depends, it's usually because I need more information.
Yeah, and I would say anyone who's ever said to me it depends falls in has a follow-up.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not the answer. The answer is that you're never going to run into somebody and say like it depends and they walk away. The clarifying thing is I'm saying it depends because if you're saying that you want the fastest report in the world, like how long is that going to take? It depends. It depends on how much time and money you want to invest in here. Like we could get you something that works exponentially faster, right? By investing 80% of the time. But then I think to Mike's, point that he makes all the time, like that extra 20% is going to take 4 times the time it took me to get you 80%. Yeah. So it depends on how much you want to invest, right? So a lot of the questions that come up require the individual saying it depends to have the experience, and they know multiple different answers could be what you're searching for. I would say you don't hear it when people don't have that experience because somebody will ask a question and they'll answer it with the only experience or the knowledge that they have, which
that's a good point.
Could be the right answer, but it also could be the wrong one, right? And it's also where you get into this cycle of somebody asks a very specific question, it gets answered, and then they come back and be like, it's not working for me, right? You see that a lot in forums.
I would agree with that. Another one, Mark is saying something here about it depends on better requirements. And I think a lot of times when we walk into reporting pieces, the user asking for the report doesn't necessarily know all the requirements or maybe knows them, but doesn't know how to articulate them to the report builder. So that's why you get into this like it depends solution, right? Hey, you want the button on this visual? Yeah, it depends. Why don't you just click this other button that's already there that like blows the visual up and you can see all the details? Like what I find is if you spend too much time trying to get all the requirements up front, you're wasting time building things they don't need. So I feel like it's better to get something in someone's hand quicker and sooner for them to react to, because the requirements change as they see and react to what you've built. And I feel like that's really the value. Go fast.
Change
I love
management.
it.
Add value.
New work item.
All right.
I love it.
Anyway,
that,
Kurt, thank you for a great article.
Yeah.
It depends. This is a great go-to in highlighting a lot of the delineation between best practices and optimizations. It was great read for me.
Mhm.
Lot of great critical thinking through here, and really appreciate the efforts that we could talk about today.
Super good article. Go check it out. Read the article. It's really, really well written, and it has great visuals and graphics. And the goblins are always funny to look at and interesting. So great job on the artwork as always. Thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. We hope you had some fun thoughts thinking about how this it depends topic works in your work world, whether you're doing best practices or optimizations. Our only ask is if you share this with somebody else. If you like the content you had here, please let someone else know you enjoyed this topic. If there's someone who says it depends, well, then give them the link to this episode and tell them, yeah, we know all about that. So James, you just got here. Yeah, we just talked about your article, James. So welcome, James, and goodbye. So with that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Well, James, you can listen now on the audio, which will be available every Tuesday and Thursday. Subscribe on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you can follow all of our 203 episodes. By the way, congratulations on over 200, guys. Or you can join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central.
Love it. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.